Hi, Grizzlies. Welcome back. We're ready to begin our next chapter. We are on Joseph. He's on a train to Hamburg, Germany in 1939, and he's about a day from home. Ready? Here we go. The Hitler Youth led Joseph down the narrow corridor of the German passenger car. Tears sprang to Joseph's eyes. The brown shirt who had taken his father away on Kristallnacht had said, "We'll come for you soon enough." But Joseph hadn't waited. Instead, he'd gone to them with a stupid stunt. They came to a compartment with a man in the uniform of the Gestapo, the Nazi secret state police, and Joseph stumbled. The Gestapo man looked up at them through the window of his door. "No, not here, not now, not like this," Joseph prayed. And the Hitler Youth boy pushed Joseph on past. They came to the door of the Jewish train car, and the Hitler Youth spun Joseph around. He glanced over his shoulder to make sure no one was listening. "What were you thinking?" the boy whispered. Joseph couldn't speak. The boy thrust the armband at Joseph's chest. "Put that on, and don't ever do that again," the Hitler Youth told Joseph. "Do you understand?" Yes," Joseph stammered. Thank you. The Hitler Youth breathed hard, his face red like he was the one in trouble. He spotted the piece of candy Joseph had bought for Ruth and took it. He stood taller, tugged at the bottom of his brown shirt to straighten it, then turned and marched away. Joseph slipped back into his compartment, still shaking, and collapsed onto this bench. He stayed there the rest of the trip, his armband securely in place and as visible as possible. He didn't even leave to go to the bathroom. Hours later, the train pulled into Hamburg Central railway station. Joseph's mother led him and his sister through the crowds to the Hamburg docks, where their ship waited for them. Joseph had never seen anything so big. If you stood the ship on end, it would have been taller than any building in Berlin. Two giant tan smokestacks stuck up from the middle of the ship, and one of them belching gray-black diesel engine smoke. A steep ramp ran to the top of the tall black hole, and hundreds of people were already on board, milling around under colorful, fluttering pennants and waving to friends and family down on the docks. Flying highest above them all, as to remind everyone who was in charge, was the red and white Nazi flag with the black swastika in the middle. The ship was called the MS St. Louis. St. Louis was the name of a city in America, Joseph had learned. That seemed like a good omen to him, a sign that they would eventually get to America, maybe one day visit the real St. Louis. A shabby-looking man stumbled out from behind the crates and luggage piled up on the dock, and Ruthie screamed. Joseph jumped, and his mother took a frightening step back. The man reached out for them. "You made it, at last!" That voice, thought Joseph. Could it really be? The man threw his arms around Mama. She let him hug her, even though she still held her hands across her chest as if to ward him off. He stepped back and held her at arm's length. "My dearest Rachel," he said, "I thought I'd never see you again." It was him. The shabby man who had lurched from the shadows like an escapee from a mental asylum was Joseph's father, Aaron Landau. Joseph shuddered. His papa looked nothing like the man who had been dragged away from his home 6 months ago. His thick brown hair and beard had been shaved off, and his head and face were covered with scraggly stubble. He was thinner, too thin, a skeleton in a threadbare suit 3 sizes too big for him. Aaron Landau's eyes bulged from his gaunt face as he turned to look at his children. Joseph's breath caught in his throat, and Ruthie cried out and buried her face in Joseph's stomach as their papa pulled the two of them into a hug. He smelled so ripe, like the alley behind a butcher shop, that Joseph had to turn his head away. "Joseph, Ruth, my darlings!" He kissed the tops of their heads again and again, then jumped back. He looked around manically, like there were spies everywhere. "We have to go. We can't stay here. We have to get on the board before they stop us." "But I have tickets," Mama said. "Visas." Papa shook his head too quickly. "It doesn't matter," he said. His eyes looked like they were going to pop out of their sockets. "They'll stop us. They'll take me back." Ruthie clung to her brother. Papa was scaring her, and he scared Joseph, too. "Hurry," Papa said. He pulled the family with him into the stacks of crates, and Joseph tried to keep up with them as he darted from place to place, dodging imaginary enemies. Joseph gave his mother a frightened glance that said, "What's wrong with Papa?" Mama just shook her head with her eyes full of worry. When they got close to the ramp, Papa hunkered down behind the last of the crates. On the count of 3, we make a break for it, he told his family. Don't stop for anything. We have to get to that ship. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3. Joseph wasn't ready. None of them were. They watched as Aaron Landau ran for the ramp where the other passengers had already queued up to hand their tickets to a smiling man in a sailor's uniform. Joseph's father threw himself past the sailor and stumbled into the ramp's railing before righting himself and sprinting up the gangway. Wait, the sailor cried. Quickly now, children, Mama said. Together they hurried to the ramp as best they could, carrying all the suitcases. I have his ticket, she told the sailor. I'm sorry, we can wait our turn. The startled man at the front of the line motioned for them to go ahead, and Joseph's mother thanked him. My husband is just really eager to leave, she told the sailor. He smiled sadly and punched their tickets. I understand. Oh, let me get someone to help you with those bags. Porter? Joseph stood in wonder as another sailor, a German man without a Star of David armband, and a man who wasn't a Jew, put a suitcase under each arm and one in each hand and led them up the gangway. He treated them like real passengers, like real people. And he wasn't the only one. Every sailor they met doffed his cap at them, and steward who showed them to their cabin assured them they would call upon him for anything they needed while on board. Anything at all. Their room was spotless. The bed linens were freshly laundered, and the hand towels were pressed and neatly stacked. It's a trick, Papa said when the door was closed. He glanced around the little cabin where the walls were closing in. They'll come for us soon, he said. It was just what the brown shirt had told Joseph. Mama put her hands on Joseph's and Ruthie's heads. Why don't you two go on to the promenade, she said softly. I'll stay here with your father. Joseph and Ruth were only too glad to get away from Papa. A few hours later, they watched from the promenade as tugboats pushed the MS St. Louis away from the dock, and passengers threw confetti and celebrated and blew tearful kisses goodbye. Joseph and his family were on their way to a new country, a new life. But all Joseph could think about was what terrible things must have happened to his father to make him look so awful and act so scared. Isabel, outside Havana, Cuba, 1994. Isabel and her grandfather set her puppy in a chair in their little kitchen, and Isabel's mother, Teresa Padron de Fernandez, ran to the cabinet under the sink. Isabel hurried after her. Mammy was very pregnant. She was due in a week's time, so Isabel knelt down to find the iodine. Isabel's father, Hernaldo Fernandez, had always been a handsome man, but he didn't look it now. There was blood in his hair, and the area around one of his eyes was already turning black. When they pulled his white linen shirt off him, his back was covered with welts. Isabel watched as Mammy cleaned his cuts with a washcloth. Papi hissed as she disinfected them with his iodine. What happened? Isabel's mother asked. An Industriales baseball game played in the television in the corner, and Isabel's grandfather turned down the volume. There was a riot on the Malecon, Lito said. They ran out of food too fast. I can't stay here, Papi said. His head was bent low, but his voice was loud and clear. Not any longer. They'll come for me now. Everyone was quiet at that. The only sound was the soft crack of a bat and the roar of a crowd on the television. Papi had already tried to flee Cuba twice. The first time, he and 3 other men had built a raft and tried to paddle their way to Florida, but a tropical storm turned them back. The second time, his boat had a motor, but he'd gotten caught by the Cuban Navy and had ended up in jail. Now it was even harder to escape. For decades, the United States had rescued any Cuban refugees they found at sea and taken them to Florida. But the food shortages had driven more and more Cubans to El Norte. Too many. The Americans had a new policy everyone called wet foot, dry foot. If Cuban refugees were caught at sea with wet feet, they were sent to the U.S. Naval Base at Guantanamo Bay at the southern end of Cuba. From there, they could choose to return to Cuba and Castro, or languish in a refugee camp while the United States decided what to do with them. But if they managed to survive the trip across the Straits of Florida and evade the U.S. Coast Guard and actually set foot on United States soil, be caught with dry feet, they were granted special refugee status and allowed to remain and become U.S. citizens. Poppy was going to run away again, and this time, whether he got caught with wet feet or dry feet, he wasn't coming back. There's no reason to go throwing yourself onto a raft in the ocean, Lido said. You can just lie low for a while. I know a little shack in the cane fields. Things will get better. You'll see. Poppy slammed a fist on the table. And how exactly are they going to get better, Marino? Do you think the Soviet Union is going to suddenly decide to get back together and start sending us food again? No one is coming to help us, and Castro's only making things worse. As if saying his name made him appear, the baseball game on television was interrupted by a special message from the Cuban president. Fidel Castro was an old man with liver spots on his forehead, gray hair, and a big bushy gray beard and bags under his eyes. He wore the same thing he did every time he was on television, a green military jacket and a flat round cap, and sat behind a row of microphones. Everyone got quiet as Lido turned up the volume. Castro condemned the violence that had broken out on the Malecon, blaming it on U.S. agents. Poppy scoffed. It wasn't U.S. agents, it was hungry Cubans. Castro rambled on without a script, quoting novels and telling personal anecdotes about the revolution. Oh, turn it off, Poppy said, but before Mommy had reached the set, Castro had said something that made them all sit up and listen. We cannot continue guarding the borders of the United States while they send their CIA to instigate riots in Havana. That is when incidents like this occur, and the world calls the Cuban government cruel and inhumane. And so, until there is speedy and efficient solution, we are all suspending all obstacles so that those who wish to leave Cuba may do so legally, once and for all. We will not stand in their way. What did they just say, Mummy asked. Poppy's eyes were wide as he stood from the kitchen table. Castro just said anybody who wants to can leave. Isabel felt as though her heart had been ripped out of her chest. If Castro was letting anyone leave, her father would be gone before the sun rose the next day. She could see it in his wild look. You got to go now, Lido told Poppy. You have a family to take care of, a wife, a daughter, a son on the way. Isabel's father and grandfather yelled at each other about dictators and freedom and families and responsibilities. Lido was her mother's father, and he and Poppy had never gotten along. Isabel covered her eyes and stepped away. She had to think of some answer to all this, some solution that would keep her family together. Then she had it. We'll all go, Isabel cried. That shut everybody up. Even Castro stopped talking, and the TV went back to showing the baseball game. No, Poppy. No, Poppy and Lido said at the same time. Why not? Isabel said. Your mother is pregnant, for one thing, Lido said. There's no food to feed the baby here anyway, Isabel said. There's no food for any of us and no money to buy it with if there was. But there's food in the States, and freedom, and work. And a place where her father wouldn't be beaten or arrested or run away. We'll all go, while Castro is letting people out, she went on. Lido, too. What? But, no, Lido protested. They were all quiet a moment more until her father said, But I don't even have a boat. Isabel nodded. She could fix that, too. Without saying anything, Isabel ran next door to the Castillo's house. Louis, the older boy, who'd saved her from the policeman's nightstick, wasn't home from work yet, and neither was his mother, Juanita, who worked at the cooperative law office. But Isabel found Ivan and his father, Rudy, right where she thought they'd be, working on their boat in the shed. It was an ugly blue thing cobbled together out of old metal advertisements and road signs and old oil drums. It barely qualified as a boat, but it was big enough for the 4 Castillos and maybe 4 more guests. Well, if it isn't Hurricane Isabel, Senor, Castillo said. He had white hair that he wore swept back on his head, and even though there was no food, he had a middle-aged paunch to his belly. You have to take us with you, Isabel said. No, we don't, Senor Castillo said. Ivan nailed. People are rioting in Havana, Isabel said. Tell me something I don't know, Senor Castillo said. Ivan, nail. Ivan handed him another nail. My father was almost arrested, Isabel said. If you don't take us with you, they'll throw him in prison now. Senor Castillo paused, his hammering for a moment, then shook his head. There's no room, and we don't need a fugitive on board. Ivan looked at him funny, but only Isabel saw it. Please, Isabel begged. We don't have any gasoline anyway, Ivan said. He put a hand to the motorcycle motor they'd mounted inside the boat. We're not going anywhere soon. I can fix that, Isabel said. She ran home again. Her father and grandfather were still arguing in the kitchen, so she slipped in the back way. She grabbed her trumpet and gave it one long, sad look and ran out the back door. Wonder what she's going to do. I kind of think I know. What do you think? Let's read and find out. She was already in the street when she stopped, ran to the backyard, and snatched up the little mewling kitten, too. With the trumpet in one arm and the kitten in the other, she ran the few blocks to the beach, where she banged on the door of a fisherman her grandfather knew. His gas-powered fishing boat rocked gently in a little pier nearby. The fisherman came to the door, licking his fingers and frowning. Isabel had caught him at dinner. Fried fish, it smelled like. The kitten's nose sniffed eagerly at the air, and it meowed. Isabel's stomach growled. You're Marino Padron's granddaughter, aren't you? The fisherman said. What do you want? I need gasoline, Isabel told him. Is it so? Well, I need some money. I don't have any money, Isabel said, but I have this. She held out her trumpet. Isabel regretted that its brass was a little tarnished, but it was the most valuable thing she owned. The fisherman had to take it in trade. What am I going to do with that, she asked. Sell it, Isabel told him. It's French and old and plays like a dream. The fisherman sighed. And why do you need gasoline so badly? To leave Cuba before my father is arrested. The fisherman wiped his lips on the back of his hand. Isabel stood for what seemed like hours, her insides churning like a waterspout. At least he reached out and took the trumpet. Wait here, he told her. Isabel held her breath, and soon the fisherman came back with 2 enormous plastic jugs of gasoline. Each one came up to Isabel's chest. Is it enough? Isabel asked. To get to Miami? Yes, and back again. Isabel's heart soared, and she hopped up and down. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, Isabel told him. Oh, and you have to take the kitten too, she told the wiggling creature. She held the wiggling creature out to him, but the old fisherman just stared at it. Is it so? The fisherman said. Please, Isabel said, or else someone will catch her and eat her, but you have fish to eat. She can eat the scraps. The fisherman eyed the cat suspiciously. Is it a good mouser? Yes, Isabel said, though she was sure that even a mouse would give the scrawny thing trouble. Her name is Leona. The old fisherman sighed and took the squirming kitten from her. Isabel smiled and then noticed how big and heavy the gas cans were. Oh, and I also need your help to help me carry these back. All right, there we are. I knew she was going to sell that trumpet. I'm glad she got somebody to take care of the kitten too. So next time, we'll find out what happens to Mumad. You guys have a great afternoon. Bye.